Hello, everybody. Welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro class. This is the fall and winter 2023-2024 class, and we are on office hour 9. So we've got a fair number of questions that have come in today, first from Minthia and then from Sydney, and we'll jump into those. And if there's any time left over, we'll kind of go a bit deeper into the assignments. But what I'll probably do is, if we do have time, there's a question about hugelkultur. I might just pull up my hugelkultur presentation and we can walk through it, kind of share the thoughts there. So starting off, we've got a great question from Minthia, speaking to and asking about fencing. So in terms of fencing, do you ever have experience with keeping deer away? Do you advise clients to build deer fences or try and provide deer with enough food on the outskirts? So I haven't seen a successful we feed the deer and the deer stay away from everything else example yet. If I do, I'll definitely share it. But this whole idea of like we feed them and they don't come in has just not been my experience. Generally, when deer find something delicious, they tell all their friends and then they bring the extended family, and that's the end of the garden. So generally, the approach has been fencing. That said, when I went to Austria and did some training with Sepp Holter and his son Josef, I learned about bone salve, which I've practiced 6 times. And basically what you're doing is you're taking fresh bones from deer and you're putting them into a cast iron pot with a lid on it, and you're basically building a big fire around it and you're leaving it for a day. And this substance comes out of all the bones. The bones can then be used for compost or buried or whatever. And that substance, which Sepp called bone salve when translated into English, could then be cut with white gas, naphtha gas, and could be applied to a tree in a single line, single vertical line, not wrapped around the tree, but a single vertical line at or above where snowfall line would be in the winter, and have had really good results of deer leaving the trees alone. People have asked, well, what about just doing that on like fence posts, but no fencing? I haven't found that to be the case, but it can help for individual trees. So if you do have single trees that are kind of left out in the open, that works very well for deer. What about elk? What about moose, you might say, as people have. I haven't seen or had any experiences with that. I know I've applied it in places where moose and elk are and haven't seen them come in, but generally, moose are solitary, elk move in a herd. And when elk come through, they destroy everything. That's been my experience. So you kind of lose the kitchen sink along with everything else. So yeah, generally we recommend working with 8-foot high metal agricultural fencing, which is basically graduated fencing. So there's smaller hole diameters at the bottom, and then they get larger towards the top. If you are working with smaller fence posts and you want to extend it afterwards, that is doable. And you basically just hang a line and then hang flagging tape off of it, because it will interrupt the ability for the deer to gauge how high they have to jump. So you can get away with a 6-foot high fence, but with extension. I like metal posts. My wallet does not. Metal posts are easier to put in, easier to take out, easier to change. They're an asset you have for life. But depending on your place and space and all the rest of it, they can be 2 to 5 times more expensive than treated posts. So that just is the cost benefit ratio. The one thing I will say is just be conscientious that most treated posts are treated with chemicals that you would not want to grow food beside. Things like methyl bromide. Same thing that is used on pallets. So just be conscientious about using them and planting beside them, because there can be issues with contamination. And basically anything with issues with contamination, I try to put a woody deciduous stem in between me and the contamination. So I'm not growing lettuce around it, but would I grow a berry bush and pick off the berries? Yeah, no problems. Most of the science is supported that the chemicals that are used for preservation get caught up in the woody material and don't transfer to fruit. So yeah, that's my short answer about fencing. Any follow-up questions there, Minthia?
Nope, that's good to know. I did see one video where I forget who it was talking to an older woman, and she never had problems. She only had one line of electric wire, but the guy said she baited once a month, she turned on her electric one-wire fence, but she baited with tinfoil and peanut butter the
Huh.
deer. And once they got a lick of that, they wouldn't come back, but she'd do it once a month, which I have no idea if that actually would be practical or not, but it's kind of funny.
It's great. It's another training conversation, right? So
Yeah.
if you want to get into training wildlife, yeah, sure. Local conservation officer may have an issue with it, but
Yeah, especially if you want to shoot them.
yeah, if you're baiting them and then harvesting them, they will have a major problem with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Regardless of the fact that I know many farmers that use that as a pretty continuous conversation, but
But I mean, what if they're after my apples and they just
yeah,
happen to come along and there's my supper?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things in the feasibility studies that I conduct for people is if they are in an area that is ample with game and they do have a level of value about conscientiousness about their food and the value of the food and the nutrition of food, I'm always suggesting it'll be easier for you to learn how to hunt and work out your values to get there than it is to raise animals from the get-go and then put the time and energy. Anything that the local ecology is going to create, the local larder, anything that they create, anything that ecology and that history and that development creates, it's always going to be of higher niche. Always somebody's going to pick that apart. It is usually going to be of higher nutritional capacity. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an option.
Mhm. Yeah, try a prosciutto recipe on a nice rump or a shoulder of deer. It's exquisite and nothing better
Oh,
than,
really?
oh yeah. Yeah, yeah,
It's not too tough.
yeah. No. So basically as it cures over time, it gets ruby red and like full of flavor and you thin slice it just like you would prosciutto.
Oh,
Between that
interesting.
and biltong, which is a South African way of making beef jerky, that became the majority of how we processed most of that meat. That and a little bit of canning. So we would do like meatballs mostly because the texture is the same after it's finished. So yeah,
And so it's like now they try to make you fear, they have all these fancy like curing equipment and
mm,
whatever, but in the old days, don't they just use salt and meat and just hang
smoke,
it or
sugar,
smoke?
salt, temperature, and moisture control is curing. And
Right.
the majority of the fear mongering that's come, I would say probably before the last 10 years had to do with due diligence and circle of care and just making sure that, okay, let's not have people kill themselves over meat or canning. And then I would say in the last 5 or 6 years, that fear mongering has gotten to be at a very suspect and pervasive level where it feels like more and more it's about, well, don't worry about your own food, we'll take care of you, which seems like a very bizarre message. So yeah, generally it's rather straightforward. We have a great course on regenerative living called Family Food Security, where we go into how to calculate how much food your family is going to eat, and then how to go about either growing it, harvesting it, producing it, all the rest of it. We got some great recipes in there, but no, it's relatively straightforward. Like the biltong recipe is based on weight and salt, and then
Right. So it's just like fermenting.
yeah,
Yeah. I just wonder about where to like hang it or like, do you need a fridge for it?
depends on what you're doing. So if you're aging
Hmm.
meat, hanging is useful. If you are dehydrating, solar dehydrators can be built, or electrical dehydrators can be purchased and used. We picked up a Excalibur dehydrator years ago and was well worth the cost. It seemed like an expensive thing at the beginning, but for all of the meat we did and for all of the fruit and the mushrooms, and then finally, because I do not like canning tomatoes, I don't like canning until 3 in the morning. It's my least favorite thing to do. And we ended up just cutting and dehydrating the tomatoes, and it was the best sort of like lazy person's experiment, because what we ended up
Wait,
with,
kind of like sun-dried tomatoes.
kind of, except that we dry them to the point of being quite dry. I think there's like just a few percent of moisture in them. But the great thing is you crush them up, give them a bit of water, blend them in the Vitamix, and you have a perfect sauce for pasta or pizza immediately, like
Oh, nice.
within minutes. So I'm a big fan of that.
That's smart.
Yeah. And they
What
work as
is that
chips in the
course?
winter, which is great. Sorry, go
Oh
ahead.
yeah. Is that course that you do, is that through you or through yeah, just a sec. Is that through you or OSU?
It's through Regenerative Living, so it's a different company. It's the company I started.
Oh, okay. I'll check that out. That
Yeah,
sounds good.
I'll throw it in the chat if I get a chance here, or throw it into the Q&A doc.
Okay.
All right. Question 2. What is the best strategy to maximize watering for planting on a slight 1% slope? See slide 160. Link. Thanks for link. Should the beds be on contour? I have ends that curve up to retain water. Should the water flow down the length of each bed by placing them slightly off of contour in a zigzag pattern? So I pulled up this, and my understanding of these beds is they're Hugelkultur. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a work in progress. So
Sure.
I wanted to do Hugelkultur, but I'm not sure if that's the best with the vegetables. Mostly we use root vegetables and potatoes.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if Hugelkultur is the best for that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so with the Hugels,
Sorry.
no worries.
Here, bud.
Um, so one of the things about hugelkultur is that you don't want them on contour. And the reason for that is hugelkulturs are not swales. Swales are mounded earth, pre-existing. You're not adding to them, and they're usually tree growing systems. Hugelkulturs are, mini ecologies. They're a compost pile along with a soil creation mechanism, along with an accessibility aspect because the hugelkultur comes up to greet you, and they can block wind. So there's all of these things to bring into with hugelkulturs that makes it problematic that if we put them on contour, what'll happen is that water will back up behind them. You'll get a very wet zone, and that wet zone, because of the amount of water that can be held by hugelkultur, think about walking in the forest after a rain and stepping into a nurse log, and your foot goes through and it comes out and it's soaking wet because it's kind of like water in solution, or in space and time, but rigid. So we try not to put hugels on contour. We try to put them slightly off contour. So what I would do if these were hugels for you is I would probably put them slightly off contour, so that way they could drain off, and probably drain off away from the road, because we'll talk about your other question about the rolling dip in a second. But um, yeah, I would probably put them off contour. Um, and then in terms of what's best, I really like the Ruth Stout method of growing potatoes, which is not hugelkultur. Basically, we bring in the best soil possible. We put a little bit of that soil down. We put our potato or potato eye in it, and then we cover it with straw, not hay. And then as that grows up, we bury it with straw again. And as that grows up, we bury that with straw again. We water, we do all the things we need to do. But this was created by Ruth Stout, who at the turn of the century was like, I'm done bending over. There's no reason for me to dig another thing. And so she just started using straw. And what's great about using this method is we can take, at least in Alberta, we can take a rather plentiful material like straw and we can turn it into soil in a couple of years. So what I'd probably do is figure out how many potatoes you want to have for your family, figure out the planting density, and then make 4 of those beds. So that way you have space to move from one area to the next area, to the next area, to the next area. And I would use that process to then develop areas that are either hard to dig out or problematic, or you want to use it in a way that then develops the soil for planting or for something else, because it creates really nice soil within just a few couple of years. And
Okay,
then
oh,
go,
go ahead.
go ahead, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's great information because we use a majority of potatoes as our vegetable source. So that's
Awesome.
great.
Awesome. Yeah. And then for carrots, carrots work lovely in hugelkultur, because you fluff the soil up and they can go deep and all the rest of that. Um, I go back and forth depending on the site and the specifics, if I plant and what I plant and where I plant. If I'm if I'm focused on food production, or if my clients are focused on food production, I do row culture. So I go back to 30-inch beds, 6-inch walkways, a la The Market Gardener by Jean-Martin Forte, or Zach Lokes, or Curtis Stone, or originally spin farming, small plot intensive farming. But I like to farm like I garden and don't garden like I farm, because if I'm going for carrots, I want carrots. And if the next level of, well, how am I going to store these? Because you guys have, I think it's a like a trailer home. And so you want to be conscientious of, well, how much storage do we have? If I can store anything in the ground, I will. And so what we did is I bought an old cedar. It was like I think the nice ones are called Earthway or Earthwise, something like that. And the terrible ones, the one I bought for $40 off Facebook was like, I'll remember the name of it afterwards if I get a chance to think about it. But basically what I did is I went down my 30-inch bed and I went back and forth, made my rows rather tight, basically the width of the roller that was then rolling down the soil, making the furrow, dropping the seed, covering over with a little chain, and then a second roller at the back. And so I think I had 9 or 10 rows on it was a 25-foot bed, 26-foot bed. And so I calculated it out. I think it was close to 1,300 pounds of carrots. And I like doing that for carrots because I like having my carrot section. And if you don't want to pull them in the winter, all you have to do is put a low polytunnel over it. So a piece of rebar and then electrical conduit that fits over the rebar, rebar, bigger conduit, smaller rebar, smaller conduit. The local home hardware that was near me had a whole bunch of bent pieces of rebar. I was like, "Are you guys doing anything with this?" They're like, "Nope, that's going to scrap." I'm like, "Can I have it?" I got all of this rebar to do all of my staking. Had to buy the electrical conduit, and then I got some 6 mil greenhouse poly, and then some clamps, just like some simple like art clamps. And basically, before the first rain into the fall, you tarp this area, this row of carrots. And what happens is because the rain doesn't get into the soil, it doesn't freeze the carrots. The carrots don't explode. Plus, the colder it gets, the sweeter the carrot. Most plants have a response. Most temperate vegetables have a response to produce antifreeze, which in their case is sugar. So the carrots get sweeter over time. So there was nothing better. There's no better feeling of being a food superhero than in the winter in February, like walking to the garden, trundling through the snow, bringing your shovel, shoveling off the polytunnel, lifting up and pulling out fresh, beautiful, easy to pull carrots. So I would move that way, and probably similarly have 4 areas, rotate them with peas and beans and lettuce crops or brassicas, and run it that way if you were going for production, or think that you're going to get there in like 3 or 4 years when the hugelkulturs completely collapse. So if your soil just isn't that good and hugelkulturs are being used because you want to build soil and you don't want to make a special bed for it because you're going to have to till it, you're going to have to do the stale seed bed technique, and then you're going to have to seed, then I would put them into the hugelkultur. And thinking about the hugelkultur, thinking about like this pyramid, you have to think like anything that wants root depth, you kind of want to put in the middle strata. So kind of the mid tier. If you want to think of a third as the bottom, a third as the middle, and a third as the top, this kind of gets into the planting strategies. But you want to put your big crops, your sunchokes, your parsnips, all the rest of that there. But another point to think of is if you're prepping an area for a garden in the future, parsnip, sunchoke, daikon, all of those are great cheap seed to basically do similar to the Ruth Stout method. Throw out a bit of soil, throw out a bit of seed, throw on the straw, and call that done for a year. You're just going to let that go. If it grows, great. If it doesn't, great. I probably wouldn't even water it in year one, depending on the year. Might give it a little bit if it needed it, but I'd probably start some experiments of dryland farming to start developing your own super water resilient seed. So, if you've got a couple of parsnips that grow up and look good, it's like, great, I'm going to take those off, take a little bit of string, neon yarn works well, let them grow up, capture that seed, grow that next year. Now you've got local resilient seed for your site that will just continue to get better and better year after year. So it's a very big question because now you've gotten into, well, how am I specifically going to grow food on my area? But all of those are techniques that you could use in specific situations. Does that help, or have I complicated things?
No, it's definitely helpful, and of course, it's such a learning I come from a boutique garden maintenance background, so it's like there I have got a lot to learn. And yeah, no, that's great information, and stuff I'll definitely look into more.
Okay, cool. Do you have resources I could look at for irrigation? So this was kind of a stumper for me, which was funny because I know how to design and develop irrigation, but I don't have any resources on it because I was taught by people in the field. So I've done a call out to colleagues and whatnot, and we'll see if we can find you some good resources that can help you start off well.
Awesome, appreciate that.
Seasonal runoff goes down the gravel road towards the creek. I don't know how to divert that into something useful. Do you have any suggestions? Adding the rain tank B will definitely help to stop roof runoff from contributing, but the rest of the snow with the driveway will go down the road. It would be nice to deal with this as it will also help with ice reduction during freeze thaw. What are your thoughts? Yeah, so a couple of thoughts here and conversations. So with this water coming down, chances are you don't necessarily want, well, actually, I'm going to ask a question first. I'm not going to assume. Um, what is your understanding of this parking area's contribution to the water that's flowing out? Like if you were to, excuse me, if you were to calculate the water catchment like we did in assignment or week 5, where would that area be from your perspective?
You mean like the runoff coefficient kind of thing, or
Just the catchment. So like, what's the roof that collects and contributes? Because it looks like over here, a bit of this water goes this way. So like how much of this area, so if I was to draw this out from like a catchment conversation, so like, is this too small to see? Yes, this is too small to see. So if we were to say, well, it's kind of like this in terms of all of this is the catchment that's coming in here, that would be the water catchment. And we could calculate that and figure out how much water is coming down. So that's my question. Like
oh,
how much of that area is actually the water catchment?
oh, okay. Probably not. Probably, I would say half of that, because it kind of goes flat and then goes into the woods a little bit,
Okay.
behind it. Um, yeah, I would say probably half.
Okay. So that helps us understand how much water we'd probably be dealing with. And there's a there's a technique called a rolling dip. So if this is our road, then we have, and if this is we have to do our car base first. Let's use a different color like this. So let's say this is the width or the length, pardon me, the length of our car. That's the car. I could make the top a bit so we're clear it's a car. The wonderful car, never bet, and never a better car was drawn by line. Then what we do is we then develop this rolling dip technique, which basically ends up taking this width, and so this width then becomes both the dip width and the hump width. So this can be very, very slight. It can be like a couple of centimeters deep and a couple of centimeters tall. And this was a response to when people create their little speed bump divots and then shunt water off and it channelizes. This is a very passive way of creating like a very elongated speed bump that also has a divot in it. And if we then put that in here, so let's call, you know, that one way and let's call that a crosshatch. So if we do it that way, wherever there's a possibility to bring water into some area or issue of value. So if these trees are a value or if the garden's below a value, that's where I would put the rolling dip. And so let's say if we did it here, so this would be our ditch or our ditch, and then this would be our berm here. And basically what'll happen is that water will then come off into here, and then it can be of value or use. So if we then go to your area here, it could go into the garden, garden expansion for the medicinal bed. It could be a little bit lower and come into this very first bed itself, or there could be a small rain garden here or something of that effect to actually absorb and use that water. Is where I would start to think about it.
That's pretty cool. I never heard of that before, and that's yeah, looking at it, it makes total sense. It would be totally useful and not so hard to do because it's just a gravel road.
It's super easy. I think we said that your husband has the ability to use mechanical equipment or
Yeah,
excavators, graders, skid steer with a blade at the back will do this really easily. So basically what you do is you get a laser level, and then you basically chart it out on grid paper at scale. And so a foot in, it has to be this deep, a foot in, it has to be this deep, a foot in, it's this deep, and then it has to be this high. And so basically it's a two-person team. One person's running all the levels, the other person's running the machine. And then once you're finished, you just do a quick smooth. And what we found is it works really, really good as an easy way of developing water diversion. You can always go into the box method, which is like 2x6, 2x6, and then supports in between. And so it's like putting a gutter into the road. I find with any sort of grade, they can be really problematic for getting filled with gravel, and you got to clean it out, and then you got to put it someplace. So I usually go to the rolling dip because you can do it in a couple hours, and then you can see how it works.
that's great. Yeah, I think we'll try that because we do have a problem with ice, and if we can go into somewhere useful, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to also bring up the erosion control field guide from Quivera. I'm going to put a link in here, as long as I don't delete the link. This has been a brilliant tool, rolling dip. So I'm going to put it in there in the rolling dip. Oh, that's not correct. Didn't copy. Anybody else find that every once in a while their copy and paste just doesn't want to update? And then I'll also put in the resources up top because it's technically a book. Oh, it's funny. It's already up there. Of course it is. So this guide, I'll just share my screen here. This guide is a brilliant step-by-step approach to doing erosion control field guide. It was created by the Quivera Coalition. I think it was Bill Zedike and Craig Sponholtz who put this one together. Huh. I'm not sure why it's gone slow all of a sudden. Very weird. You all look like you're moving and alive, so must just be the web address. Let's try this again. Sometimes there's so many common questions. I just want them added to the PDC materials, but then the PDC would be 2 years long. So basically this is erosion control field guide, Craig Sponholtz and A.V. Anderson. I think it was inspired by Bill Zedike. Great little conversation about low-tech erosion controls. So one rock dams, rock mulch rundowns, Zuni bowls, media lunas, and maybe it's not in here. Okay. I have to think about where this is. All right. Great resource guide anyways. Glad we had an opportunity to even take a look at it. But yeah, I will see if there's another guide for that. It's relatively straightforward. It's pretty much exactly what I said. Hugel presentation, if time. Is vine canopy that attaches to a house a fire hazard because of the woody stem or hazard because of the leaves? In drought, it would be a hazard. If watered, less a hazard. Pretty straightforward. So if it's beautiful and vibrant and the leaves are green and everything's beautiful, it would be less of a hazard. And in drought, it would be more of a hazard. And in a dry summer or in a fire situation where you had to leave the house, it would slowly become a hazard. That answer your question?
Yeah, pretty
Okay.
straightforward.
Awesome. Do ridge and valley dams have different purposes? Why would one choose one or the other? Or perhaps there's only one option available on the site and they have no choice. Ridge dams seem less common, but I did see a video on it, so I was just curious. Yeah. So I'm just going to bring up the Agrarian's Handbook here. Great handbook if anybody's interested in large scale design. If you're on acreages, the Agrarian's platform is amazing, and the Agrarian's handbook is brilliant for better understanding site and better understanding the processes we work in. It's based off of P.A. Yeoman's work, which is keyline design. Keyline design is often thought of as just the plow, but it was an entire farm design service that Darren Darty and the Agrarians really took to task as a full and complete design process. And if anybody is interested in going to large scale design or taking the next step out of permaculture, because permaculture is a great first step. But if you're looking at design as a full-time career and looking at working at scale, it's just not enough. You need to have other tools in the toolbox. So yeah, this is the one I'm looking for. Was able to find it. So this is the Agrarian's Handbook. I'll put a link in it, a link to it in the notes. And so this is the water chapter. And so a hillside dam, also a ridge dam. So basically, we've got different types of dams, and they do have different types of processes and different types of reasons for using them. One of the things is after you've done your analysis of a site and you found potential places to put in dams, you generally want to put dams in places where water naturally collects or is easy to flow to with diversion ditches or swales or things of that nature. For the earth moved, for the area stored of water, the valley dam is usually the best return on energy investment. So if you move energy, or if you move soil or earth out of a valley dam, chances are you're going to get the most amount of capture, with the rest of these being less and less and less because the way that the contour and the way of the shape of the land is. Where hillside dam or ridge dam or contour dam are going to be the most amount of effort to move that material for the least amount of capture. Also, they can be problematic because they don't necessarily have that full view of range of natural water collection or congregation. So it can be another reason not to go with something like a contour dam or a ridge dam. I could go on about this for an hour or two. I'm just wanting to think if there's another major point I should make before I step off this. No, I wouldn't think so. I think that makes a good point about the sizing and the shape, why you would use one over the other. Generally, what you want to do is you want to look at a site, go up to where the geography section is. You want to look at a site. This is Navalin, P.A. Yeoman's, one of his premier properties. This is the one that had enough water to overgraze what the national stocking average was. And you can see here he's got these little turkey nests at the top, and these were basically to capture the highest amount of water at the top, but also to bring in what was this water capture. And so this is that catchment zone we were talking about before. And so these then became the highest points of water that they could then hold and move down. And then over here, we've got what looks to be almost like a pseudo hillside dam, almost a valley dam, and the rest of them are all valley dams, just taking that inflection point. And that's one of the things that P.A. Yeomans gave us was the idea of the key point, which is in the primary valley where the landscape goes from convex to concave, from proud to undergrade, let's call it. And the reason for that is that when water was falling on the landscape over millennia, that water has such the raindrop has such a violent approach to earth, is that when it hits it, it breaks apart the sand, silt, and clay, puts them in solution, then carries them merrily down the stream. And as you learned, all of you, in your shake jar test, sand drops out first, then silt, then clay. And so what they found is that right after the inflection point is where they usually find the most amount of clay. That's the reason why the key point is so valuable, and why P.A. Yeoman's observations and just his whole approach of how he got to them by having big observations is so important for us, is to understand that level of value. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it's definitely like, I mean, I knew nothing about it before, so that's good to know. And interesting that that's where all the clay is, but it does make sense.
Awesome. Okay. Next question from you. When will we lose access to log into the, oh, somebody moved my picture. When will we lose access to log in to view course materials? So the OSU PDC Pro landing page specifies that the course material is available for 2 years. That said, I don't know if they kick people off. I've heard of students still having access to it years later. So officially, the university says 2 years, and unofficially, I've heard people are on there for a while. Minthia, as usual, amazing questions. Thank you for the quality and the quantity on both of them. That was great. All right, Sydney, cross section for zone 1 if there's no plants and it's flat. Okay. So I guess I would ask a question about terms of your base map here. I'm just going to pull it up. What's the area that you're planning on doing a cross section of it, and why?
That's the thing, is I like kind of the rest of the questions are about. So for I kind of so my overall plan is that last week's assignment I planned the like native gardens, but smack dab in the middle that's going to be the vegetable garden. Because my front yard's going to be no lawn, just plants. And it's not zone 1 technically right now, but I guess it will be. So should that be included in it? Otherwise, zone 1's mostly just like deck and social areas, because we can't grow much in the backyard. And then so right now it's just patio, which will get changed. But like if you look at it, it's mostly pavement in the backyard and pavers. So I don't know what should be included per se.
Okay. So in this area, in this site, how much, like what's going to go where? And maybe we should go to some of your design approaches here so we can kind of get a sense, because I saw this originally. So this is sort of the native garden with a couple of production species. So is the veggie garden going in the middle there, or is it going in the back there?
No, it has to go in the front yard because their
Okay.
backyard's full shade.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. All right. So what I would think is, if you're going to do a cross section, and why you would do one in terms of the value, is I would probably do, I'm going to go back to your basement. Here we go. Knowing what I know, and I'm just going to quickly kind of draw it in here. And I imagine it'll change because you've gone through some great iterations as well. I have to remove that so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so you kind of have some plants here, and they're going to come in here, and then you've got some stuff here and some stuff here. Beautiful. So if the veggie garden kind of occupies this space, and if we're thinking about solar access and whatnot, what I might think would be useful from a cross-section point of view is either to take in sort of that line so you can kind of see what the sizing and everything is, or this line.
Okay.
And it's fine if it's flat, because really we want you to be able to know how to develop and design that cross section. So if this is an A to an A apostrophe, basically what it'll look like from A to A apostrophe is we'll have the sidewalk, and then we'll probably have some sort of veggie garden. And then we might have some trees in the back. That's usually when we're developing, we kind of want to use the height. So we may have a tree back here. But there could be a value to understanding how high the heights of the house is. So what I might do is I might come back in after the fact and throw in the house after the fact, so I can kind of see what everything is in the background, usually doing it in light gray so you can kind of see that background, and then showing the heights of the downspouts and whatnot. So that way you can see kind of where everything goes, throw in the door, wherever it might be. And then have that as background and have this as foreground so you can kind of see heights. If you decided to do another cross section, I would do one between, I would do one this way, so that way I could then see how your initial plantings, the plantings and the house interacted. And so in that case, if we did one in that way, so let's call that A and A apostrophe. So this is A and A apostrophe. We're gonna have to be a little smaller this time. So we'd have our shrubs and probably our upper story of trees on this side. And then we would get into the veg garden in the center. And then we would get again our shrubs. And then we would get into the house again. So flat is fine because there's always going to be vegetation that kind of shows that change. But I would do probably one of those two or both if you're feeling ambitious. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Cross section is going to be social area. Most of the design already went to the garden last week, so not sure what to focus on here. Okay,
That's
so, oh yeah, go ahead.
basically what we just chatted about.
Okay, perfect. Should the veg garden be included in this design, even though technically it's not in zone 1, but zone 1 will be extended in reality? So if it's going to be in your new zone 1, yes. And if not, I would hold off and just put it into the final design. Thoughts on setting up drip lines and watering systems that are more hands-off. My water sources are in really crappy places, although I have been told I can run a spigot at least to the front potentially. Okay, great. So generally, I like super simple irrigation systems and processes. And while I can't, do an entire course on irrigation in 18 minutes, what I can say is that the simplest irrigation process is going to be the best. So if you only run a hose to the front and then probably do 2 zones, which usually means that if you're working with a timer, and Rainbird, I found is a pretty good brand for getting the timers. And because it's on the north side of the house, that should be great. They don't do well in full sun and they bake during and are destroyed during heat domes. I can attest to that. So basically, if you ran let's do a blue. So if you ran like a hose up front and then you had a small controller up there, like a Rainbird or something else that you found. So we'd have a little controller there. Here's our controller. What I'd probably do is 1, 2, or 3 zones, depending on your water requirements. So if we were going to do this where there is a veggie garden, so I'm just gonna quickly kind of throw in some over so we can take a look at, so we've got kind of a section there, call those our perennial sections. And then we've got our annual section. I'll put it in pink, like so. Also, the more you work with irrigators, the more you realize that irrigation plans look hilarious. They look like this. They're just super simple enough to get across the conversation. So we would have a zone 1 that would probably come out here. And if it's trees, you're probably going to do small diameter line and then probably spaghetti strings around the trees individually. And then you'll probably trench this over to zone 2 and then have that similarly come off. And so usually what you do is you have these little lines that come off with little spaghetti strings. The great thing is that if you go to any irrigation supply store with your rough plan, they'll basically look at it and go, great, this is how I would do this. This is how I would change this. They're usually fantastic. And then similarly, I would run a zone 3 here. Notice that when I'm running these are all separate lines. Basically, the issue is that when we're running irrigation on small scale like this, or small scale food production, we can't run all zones at once because the pressure would drop and they would just dribble out. You wouldn't get your full wetting pattern. So basically you'd have 3 zones here. You'd have a 1, a 2, and a 3. So you'd have a 1, a 2, and a 3. And then similarly, you can do that in the backyard off that one line. Although with the pavement there, you're probably going to have to think about some innovation, maybe going underneath this little section or something like that. Does that help? Any follow-up questions from that?
If I wanted to mainly use not city water because we're gonna have drought this summer, I think that's just how it's gonna be, and we might not be able to use it in gardens. All the main areas to collect water off of are in the backyard.
Okay.
So would it just be hand watering at that point?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to do that. You can get an inline pump. So say you ended up getting some large collection, and by large, I mean you have to start at 1,000 and go up to 5,000 liters pretty quick. But off of that, you can throw a small inline pump that'll basically pressurize the water as it's pulling. So it'll pull and pump at pressure. You can set it to 30, 40, 50 PSI. And so if you're trying to go off of collected water that's in the winter and the spring and use it over the summer, I would look at it that way. And then the other thing I would do and be very conscientious of is if you are developing tree systems, definitely do something like a hugelkultur or at minimum a swale for water infiltration. At this point, with pretty much all clients, I'm moving them to hugelkulturs for supplementary irrigation via water holding capacity, because if we can increase the water holding capacity here, we can do tremendous things. Same thing with mulching. So 3, 6, 9 inches of mulch. And then with the vegetable area, I would think about having structure over top of that. You can put up shade cloth or remade cloth. So if we do get another big heat wave, you can shade that immediately, because that'll help to keep that moisture within the soil.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, Trip. Deer. Yes, we talked about deer. How do we keep hares out of a garden? Usually, predatory domestic animals work pretty good. Otherwise, you're going to a full fenced and you're going metal, small gauge, and you're digging it in, has been my experience. That said, the biodynamic folks have some wild and crazy ways of keeping animals away. And I hazard to talk about them because they're so far out there, but I'll leave it to you to look up biodynamic resonance antennas and keeping animals away, because it's kind of wild and crazy. I had some personal experience with it and it has worked, but it's just so far out there. But yeah. Okay. Tools for building a small swale. How small, and who asked this?
So I have an acre, and I have this weird topography where it has a general slope going south, but then I have an above ground septic system. So I'm trying to draw water so it exits to my east. I want to like cut through the land, especially through the garden areas.
Kevin, do you have a link to your portfolio so we can
Oh,
see
yes, I
this?
do. Sorry.
Okay.
Let me just get it here. Work. I just put it in the chat.
Okay. All right. So let's go down to the area. Should we just go to the base map, I imagine?
Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the area you're looking at?
So farthest to the right, you see those two big purple, yeah, those are like my garden areas.
Okay.
And the slope it's higher at the top of the picture, and it just goes down about 2 meters until you get to that big orange thing at the bottom. That's an above ground like leach field. So that's like a little mound I have there. So all the water just like pools in between the last garden area and the leach field, and then it goes down to my basement.
Oh, okay.
So what I want to do is like more or less where the garden areas start.
Yep.
Towards the right. I want to like cut through and kind of evacuate the water to the end, to the east side of the property, to the right side.
Okay.
I want just to evacuate the water. And I need to cut, I've already drawn them out, like on the leach field as it descends, I want to cut through the sides of it so the water that's rolling down kind of gets caught and then evacuates outward also. The thing is, like, I've been looking at like a rototiller is like overkill, I feel, because it's like it's gonna create this big swale that I think is overkill. I've seen people use like a little shovel, but it's like this is gonna be a lot of work. I've seen like mechanical edgers. I don't, and again, I'm fairly ignorant about like, well, how big should this swale be? Like how, I mean, we get a lot of rain, and when it rains, like it just I have a really bad like water drainage system that I'm trying to fix here. But anyway, if
Sure.
you had to dig like swales to cut through this, I don't know what your thoughts would be.
Yeah, so a couple things here is up here in between sort of garden 1 and garden 2, food production area 1 and 2. I'd be conscientious that that as a swale would probably make sense, but technically swales are ditches on contour, and what you want to do is not a ditch on contour. You want to do a ditch that's basically going
Yeah.
off grade, down slope, off property. So that's fine. And if you were wanting to use that as a food growing mechanism, I could see that being a small row of bushes or a trellis of raspberries or cane fruit or something. But if I was doing something that size, and if you're having as much water as you're talking about, depending on what the heck this is, what is this again? Ground well. Okay, so yeah, so we're not going to cut this line. So it would probably start here and come this way and be off contour. This is meters. You're going to have to put your meters in there. That's 5, 10, 50. So it's 20 meters. It's nothing to laugh at. Okay, so if you want to get your sweat on, then you call some friends over, promises of food, trick them with shovels, picks, and mattocks.
Okay.
And you set the line before they get there, and you say, guys, needs to be like this, needs to be this deep. We got to go. And then you come along with either a level or an A-frame or what have you, and just make sure that there's a drop, probably a 2 to 4% drop. So that way you do have channelization that moves it off property. You're definitely making problems for your neighbors if you do have neighbors that live here. And then here, what you'll probably want to do is, because this is a solar corridor for your food growing, you probably aren't going to want anything taller than 2-3 feet. And because this is a leach field, you probably want to go to some kind of pollinator, beautification, olfactory addition to the site. You won't necessarily want to go to food production because of that leach. But the nice thing is that if you have something there, it then becomes a filter. So, go with bee balm, go with lacifalacia, go with lilac. Lilac's a little tall for this, but any of the others are good. Hollyhocks, anything in the perennial flower conversation within your zone. And then similarly, you could have that directly on contour, but I probably wouldn't. I'd probably start on contour, and I'm going to erase this and redraw it as well as my shaky mouse hand can do. I'd start on contour here, slowly drop off, slowly drop off, slowly drop off, something like that.
Yeah.
And then similarly, invite the friends over, or if you're like me and you like learning, rent a mini excavator, call it therapy, because I feel like time on machines is therapy, and learn how to slowly move about the landscape and actually move and work with it. You have to come back in with a shovel and a rake and smooth it over and everything else. But either it's going to be, that big, that long, depending on the enthusiasm of the friends and their physical fitness. It's probably going to be a day and a half or 2 days with picks, mattocks, shovels, rakes, things like that. Or it's going to be maybe 2 hours on a mini excavator.
And let's say I dig a beautiful ditch on contour. It's big enough. Can I get away with filling that with like wood chips and expecting the water to move by itself?
Yeah, absolutely. You can make it a wood chip swale trail, no problems.
Okay.
The main thing is that if you're doing that, so if this is our grade and we make our swale, just make sure to mound up the wood chips similar to the crowning. So in the center, you've got that crown, because what'll happen is as you walk on this will get lower and lower. And if you do it the opposite way, and if you do it this way and it's flat, then you get this divot and you'll always have water where you want to walk.
I see. That makes sense. All right. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Great question. Awesome. Any other questions that are coming up from this?
I had one more question addressing the leach, the toxic things that leach out of the treated wood. is there a point that the wood is not leaching anymore, do you think? Or is it always a hazard?
Well, this is the funny thing because we buy treated posts so that way they resist rot. So
Yeah.
once they start to rot, we can effectively say that the treatment is mitigated. It's no longer
Okay.
viable.
It's
So I
more
would say once you start to see that the wood is rotted and the fence is falling over, it's done.
okay. Well, it's just that this guy was taking apart his deck because he
Uh-huh.
was building a new one. The wood wasn't bad. He just wanted a new deck. So I went and picked it up. So I have all these treated boards that are probably 15 years old.
Nice.
They're in good condition, but they're old. The same this it was a picnic table too. A neighbor gave me a picnic table. The it's the boards are warped, but these are like like inch and a quarter, like it's really nice wood. So
Okay.
it's like I don't know if it would be wise
I think
to use them or not. They're clearly like doing their own the function that they needed to have, like
yeah. So what are you thinking of using them for then?
raised beds.
Okay. So if you're going to use them for raised beds, the way to do this, and I'll bring up something so I can draw on it. So I've worked with treated or undesirable wood before. And the way to do it, or at least a way to do it, not the way, but this is the way we did it. So if this is a top-down view, so wrong one, incorrect. Let's try again. All right, so this is a top-down view, and this is like the side of the board. What I would do is I would do them end to end, and then get a 4x4 post and put them in the center there. And basically, what this does is it locks them in. This is a really strong way of building a garden bed, and hard one. There's many a garden bed that are no longer standing because I didn't know this. So basically, if these are our posts, and I'll do a little 3D off of this in a sec. Then what we do is we use pretty big leg bolts that basically come through offset, obviously, from this side and this side, so they don't hit each other. This side and this side, they don't hit each other. And then the one thing you have to be worried about, and this happens all the time, is that if you span pretty much more than, I would say, 6 feet, if this is around an inch and a half, as you were saying, you usually then have to put in a center post driven into the ground, so that way you don't get bowing. And similarly, put in the bolts in there, or you can do a threaded rod. And this can be the easier way to do it. So you do 2 or 3 threaded rods into the garden bed, basically to hold it together, so that way it doesn't bow out. That makes sense to you?
Yeah. So you wouldn't be concerned about the chemicals in the treated wood after 10 years or so?
So basically what I would do after this, and this is good actually for all types of bed construction, not just ones that are done with treated wood, but we line them. And so we'll take like lumber wrapper because it's cheap, easy, and free. And so we'll come in here and we'll just line the outside. We'll just basically put that lumber wrapper all the way around. So that way the whole bed's lined, and then we'll put our soil or our Hugelkultur into it.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. And that's the way to keep it from going. And you can either staple it in, which is usually what we do, or you can just lay it in and then just muck about with the top. I just like putting it in, stapling it, and then filling it, because then it's done. So if you are going to use material, that's probably how I would do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to hog the conversation, but like for the group, is like, has anybody tried with the metal sheet raised beds? I see people like selling those and promoting them, but I don't know if they're worth their.
I've used the metal, not sheet, but the metal beds.
Do they work well? Do they resist time?
I've only had it since 2019, and they look good. The ones that I have with wood, it's falling apart. So,
So
that's
I
good to
can
know. Yeah.
also comment. I'm going to quickly see if I can actually find a photo of this. So the site that I used for everybody for the template is my dad's place. And he worked for a roofing company. And so one of the beds that I designed for him through that course material is, I'm going to put it over onto the other screen. And we're going to do that so I don't show everybody's personal information. Lovely. Oh, and then I lost it. Let's go try again. One more time. This time with feeling. Okay, here we go. All right, so it's back to Zoom, share screen, share desktop too. Okay. So this was, these were all the strawberries, my extra strawberries that I grew after year one. I had to get rid of them. So I mailed them to my dad. Canada Post lost them. And so they showed up like this, which is not great. But basically the design of the bed that I designed for him was all done with roofing material, extra roofing material, offcuts. And it went down the length of the fence, and you can see the fence is falling over, but this won't fall over for a very long time. And it was basically done in such a way so that way we had the posts that were on the outside are holding in the roofing material, and then he put an extra line post. So in chain link fence, we've got what's called corner post and line post. These are what's called line post. And this is a little trick I picked up years ago. You take cups and you basically put them over top of all your plants or pots. He cut out the bottom. That was totally not necessary. That was a communication error. And then you throw the mulch on them, and then you just pop off all the cups, and that way they're perfectly mulched. So that was the way he went about it. We had a little split. So there's two watering mechanisms here. First off, we've got, this is a whole Hugelkultur bed. The drain comes down from here. Big old piping comes down. Water dissipates pretty quickly, like within 6-7 feet, it just gets absorbed. This is why this end looks beautiful. And then we just did soaker hoses because it was cheap and easy and he had access to it. But this was a really easy way to build a garden bed, and it has zero bowing, which is wild. Like, look how straight that is and the amount of pressure. And then, so that's before mulching and after mulching. So yeah, great use of material, and I really like using it. And offcuts are easier to find, so. Minthia, you use lumber wrapper for all raised beds or just undesirable? No, not all raised beds. So in that metal bed, I wouldn't put it. There's no reason. It's basically just to give the wood a chance to not be in contact with water and not be a vector for rot. And I definitely had my purist phase where plastic never touched my gardens. And then I became wise to the fact that everything comes in plastic, and I didn't need to be such a purist. So, you know, if there's a good solution to a material that's definitely an offcut or an offcast, I will. Oh, and yeah, Minthea's got a great point, Kevin. If there's a sawmill near you, you may find some cheap, rough cuts there, or slab. So generally at the mill, what they have that they always want to get rid of is the slab. And I've created a lot of garden beds off of slab, but I absolutely line them because slab rots very quickly. So if you use that for the material, generally you can put that on the inside. That garden bed design I showed you initially, that's for like a beautiful garden bed. The one I showed you of my dad's is like, you don't care, because, you know, it's always about the aesthetic and the aesthetically driven. And, you know, that's farmyard sexy. That's not, you know, looks beautiful and everyone's having a good time about it. So generally, if you can create that structure and that conversation in a way that works for you or for others, then that works out. Any questions about that design or any other garden beds before we wrap up today?
Yeah, sorry. I heard somewhere on the interwebs, I can't remember where, that hugelkultur within vegetable, like raised beds, provide too much nitrogen, and then it causes like an off balance and yellowing leaves. Is this true, not true? Can you myth bust?
Okay, so the science on this is definitely not in, so I can't speak to it specifically. I have been slandered at length when I taught Hugelkultur workshops by people who had heard this secondhand, had never done anything about it. And a lot of those studies were based off a study that was done with wood chips. So basically, because the wood chips are an unnatural product, you won't find wood chips in nature. They don't just miraculously appear except around beaver sites, and even then they're rather small. And a portion of the tree, not the tree, the beaver doesn't take the time to remove everything and put it all down. What has been found out from hugelkultur after years, decades of people doing it, is that if you have too much small diameter wood, and if it's wood chips, you definitely get a situation where it pulls the nitrogen out of the surrounding soil and out of the plants. If you just use logs, I've never had that issue, not once. I've never seen a deficiency from a visual assay of the plant leaf material or its fruits to make me go, I don't want to do hugelkultur again. The majority of that comes from 2 or 3 studies that I've read about wood chips. And then the people who go, you buried wood, that's the study. You're a terrible person for sharing this knowledge. And so that's been my experience. I'd love to be able to spend the time to do a full hugelkultur literature review and just see what's out there. I need a German cohort because most of the research has been done in Germany off of Sepp's sites. I know he had, when I was there, he talked about University of Munich or something coming and doing tests on his hugels. But here's a man like Sepp who goes, and what did they find? That I've been feeding myself for 25 years off of these. You know, that's his response, is like, they grow food. Does that mean that you'll get in a situation where for whatever the composition is internally, it might go off and it may not be as productive as 2 feet down the line? No, they're organically created by organic people who are inherently flawed. So no, they can change and become issued within their own situation. But just quickly, because I know I would say this, I said I would say this earlier. So generally for planting of annual veg, if you don't want to do the broadcast method, which I'll explain in a moment, the bottom is root or large. So any of your big squashes, any of your big root crops can kind of go on the upper third. So definitely squashes are at the bottom. So these are your Hubbards, your keeping squash, your pumpkins, your spaghettis. Spaghettis can go a little bit higher up. Butternuts are at the bottom. Things like that. Acorn squash are at the bottom. Then as you move up into that zone that has the most root depth without having the driest section, that's where all your root crops go. So any of your radish, your parsnip, your any root crops, and that's interspersed with any of your brassicas. So your broccolis, your kohlrabis. Kohlrabis can also go at the bottom because they're a bigger leaf and they'll create more spread. But any sort of the lettuces, the brassicas, things like that. As you get to the top, depending on how you design your hugels, my approach to hugelkultur has always been, I want the most amount of food for the least amount of effort. So when I design and build these, I want to use the full verticality for the full vertical space of it. And because of that, I almost always put trellises up top because I want to have that verticality. So this is, this needs to stop talking. How do I make this from stop talking? So this is a keynote presentation I just want to share with everyone, but I need it not to talk because I don't want to listen to myself. All right, hold up. Oh, there we go. Nice. Okay. This is long time ago. It is 2013, 11 years ago. Also, the people who bought this house removed the hugelkultur, but they now have a very green kidney-shaped area of their lawn, which I find very funny. Keynotes. Cool. All right. So this was at planting in June. I've learned over the time that I would rather plant in the fall. So these are all of our little squash seedlings here at the bottom. And brown on brown is a lovely color choice. I'm going to switch that. There we go. So that's all the squash. We did a lot of brassicas and whatnot in the center here. And then at the top, because I really like climbers and creepers and everything else, this is where our sunflowers, our peas, beans, all of that went. I've also made hugelkulturs that were built to become perennial beds, and I've started strawberries at the top, and then they just cascaded down by themselves. That worked really well. I didn't have to do much around that bed, which I really liked. So that worked out as a way of just like super hands off. And then this was just 2 months later, which, oh, to go left and right. So that's 2 months later. So you can see we've got the marigolds, calendulas, we've got the squash at the bottom. We've got our sunflowers that sometimes can work as trellises themselves, but we ended up getting this huge rain. There it is. We ended up getting this huge rain, 70 millimeters of rain in 4 days and 100-kilometer winds. And basically the sunflowers actually fell and protected everything else, which was amazing. I was so surprised that that was the situation. This is another one where students of mine, that's Josh Wegler of Edible Landscapes Design, great company if you're looking for beautiful urban and semi-urban scapes as inspiration. I know we talked about it in the aesthetic design for ecological landscapes. That's Josh. And this was largely food. So this was almost all squash and peas and beans. This was one in Santiago de Cuba when we were running a PDC down there. This became soil in 3 months, which is which is insane. They were able to harvest it in 3 months. This was at the end of a really big garden that was used to create to build and create all of their own food again. We just grabbed all the wood we possibly could, put up the trellises. Because it's the tropics and because the tropics uses a lot of nitrogen in short amount of time, we ended up collecting everybody's pee for a couple of days and then diluting it. I think it was 1 to 10, and then putting in some wood chips. These wood chips and sawdust. This sawdust was from a eucalyptus, and I really did not want to include it because it was very early on. It hadn't lost its antimicrobial, antifungal conversation. And then did the big mulch, and that was day 1, day 0, day 1, day 2. I've asked for photos of this recently. Actually, it'd be interesting to see what the last 9 years has done to it. Oh, there it is. Yeah, 2016. So 1 year later, you can see that yeah, the hugelkultur was producing well. This was in Vernon. This was a little side area. This is the broadcast method. So this is the different process I was talking about. You basically split the seeds into small, medium, and large, and then you broadcast with your hand. And this is great just to see what wants to grow where. So in year 1, you do that, and then in year 2, you come back and you just select the areas for what. The joke here was hugelkulturs produced so much, I ended up with a baby and a wife at the end of the workshop. It's Jenna McNabb of Element Eco Designs. 1 month later, and then 2 months later, that was all of our lettuce, or their lettuce, pardon me, for summer with only 4 waterings, which was pretty good. 1 year later, no mulch for 6 months during an Okanagan drought. Squash was doing great. Problem is that the plow was pulling all the road rock runoff into it, and so they ended up taking it out years later. Squash was great though. Yeah, there's some of the rocking. This is another one we did. We called it the answer to food security because it was a big question mark. This is at oh wow, that was quick. This is Andy and, oh yeah, this was quick, right? Andy and Alan and Sandy's place. And again, that was the group. Apparently wear the same shirt when I do hugelkultur workshops. That's funny. 1.5 months later. And Sandy and Alan are still saying it's one of the most productive areas of their site. This is a big, I talked about this before, so take a look at the tree. This is called a Kaiser spider. These are riparian excavators. They've got fully articulating legs and bucket. They can go up vertical walls. This was the dam that we put in. This was designed by Gord Hebert. And then I designed the hugelkultur and gave some information about how to go about it. So there's that tree again. So if we go back before, there's that tree. And there's that tree. And basically this hugelkultur was a wick in here and basically would wick up and produced a huge amount of seed tree nursery. It was a native nut tree nursery. This was on Watercliff Farm, Gabriel Island. Big hugelkultur, like 150 feet. This was cool. This is a product down from the state by Fungi Perfecti. It was a chain oil inoculated with spores that they used on site. I've made this by scratch, by hand. And then basically the hugelkultur went in, and there's that fence post marker. and then there was a pass through. So what's important to note is if you have big hugels like this, you have to make pass throughs so that way you can walk back and forth. And this is still doing really well. I saw this on Google Earth the other day. That's the cover crop. And then Darfield, this was a big design we did for an Earthship, Darfield Earthship. Again, with Element Eco Design. This was the big Hugelkultur up front. They were old sawmill, so they had lots of wood. So we did these. That's Ben Garrett of Tiny Healthy Homes. So did the plant, and that was end of the day finished, and that was only 40 days later. And big berms and gardens in between.
Are you designing them to be walked on the top?
Usually so I can get up and down them and work on them. Yeah, happens naturally, but. And then I think we've seen this before, the dog park. And then basically this was the sketch I gave the City of Victoria's Parks Department that then gave them permission for all the other hugelkulturs that they put into public parks now. So this was almost 12 years ago, and they've now made it common and put it in. And an art pollinator pathway. This was a crater garden with hugelkulturs. And then this was the big one. This was the Galliano food forest that I designed with Richard Walker. And I'm so glad we did it this way, because without it, we would have had 100% kill rate, but there was no rain and there was no watering, and the annuals died, but all the perennials lived. So, and then there's always the garden bed version of it. So that way you can stand. And this was a brilliant design I saw at Josef's farm, which used to be Sepp's farm, called the Kramatterhof. And you can tell it's German because they actually have a cup holder for your beer. So this was a great, simple way of reusing pallets and creating these great beds that you could then pick up and move. So if you need to redesign and tools go on the side, I always thought it was a great, great design. There's the mini workshop I told you I'd give you. Useful? Yeah, big smiles. Good. Awesome, folks. Well, that's it for today. We've got one more of these left. We're coming to the end of the course. You may be feeling the crunch for time because all of your assignments, including resubmissions, are due on March 11th, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard. So if you're feeling the crunch, if you're feeling like you're not going to make it to the end, a couple of options. One, when was my first PDC? 09? Yeah, 09. Okay. So that's what, 20, how long is that? What are we? 09, 2010, 20, 25 years, 15 years. In 15 years, I've had nobody ask for my PDC. Not once. No one's asked for my certificate. I haven't been out because somebody asked and I couldn't give it to them. That said, I'm just about to apply for something within the Permaculture Institute of North America. They've asked for them, but I had a flood last year and I lost all my paperwork. So take photos of things. But I haven't had anybody ask. So what does that mean? Do you need a certificate? No. Do you need to finish your work so that way you have some sense of what you're doing and get feedback? I would think so. Can you re-enroll? Yes. So if you're feeling the pinch and you're going to work right up to the day and you may not get it in, you can always reach out to Dow Orion, TAOORION, via the campus email service. And you can say, hey, I need to re-enroll. I want to do the next class, or you can even do the class that's existing. Dow knows that I accept students from the class I'm in to the class that I'm working on. If they want to just jump back in and finish at that, or the better recommendation is really take a look at your time and see if there's actually a better time to take it. So that way you can go through the material and do it properly, because getting the feedback and doing your resubmissions is the whole point. Your education, your learning, that's the point of it. The certificate is a whatever thing. I didn't say it, but you could always just print something off and be like, if that's your big deal, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares. So just keep that in mind, because we're getting to the end and I know some of you are fairly far behind, but you can re-enroll. But just know that there is no extension. March 11th, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard. Everything needs to be in. So just be conscientious of that. And if you need any help, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you got questions about design, javin@allpointsdesign.ca, send me an email. Let me know what class you're from. Send me your portfolio. Say, hey, I got a question about this, or hey, do you mind jumping on a Zoom quick? And we can do that. So All right. Any other questions, comments, queries, thoughts? What was the value of today? What are you taking away?
I just wanted to know, sorry, it's Linda. The last Zoom meeting, I was checking to see if it was up on your website on YouTube, and I haven't seen it. So I just wanted to see maybe it was just me or
Yeah, let's take a look.
I was looking at it yesterday and I couldn't find it.
I usually do it right after. So let's just see if I had a momentary lapse, which is possible. Nope. So 7 of 8 was loaded up on Jan 22nd. And then 8 of 10, which is, are we 8 of 10 today? Or are we 9 of 10? I think we're 9 of 10.
We're 9 or 10.
Yeah, so 8 of 10 of last week looks like it wasn't loaded, or it was relabeled something else. So I will look into that and see where that ended up, because chances are it probably got relabeled as something else, because we were 2 weeks ago 14th, so we would have been Feb 5th. So
Yeah.
Feb 5th. Yeah, I'll take a look at it and see what's in the backlog. Yeah, I'll put that in my to-do list. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. All right, value of today. What are you guys taking away?
Just awesome content as usual, and appreciate you always answering all of our questions.
Yeah.
Most welcome.
Yeah, I need to go out and buy beer and some shovels. And invite my friends over. That's my takeaway.
I think
I like that.
Go ahead, Linda.
Oh, I said I like the Hugelkultur presentation. Because I'm really trying to use that in my design. So it was good to see the explanation of the different pictures. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I echo that as well, Linda. So, but just seeing the visual of everything and you talking through it really helps, I don't know, put the theory into my visual brain for a better understanding. So thank you for talking that through. And then the garden bed design was really helpful as well to consider that for future reference. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I like the whole culture thing. It's cool seeing them in full bloom, because it like helps you get that visual sense of like, oh, that's what they could look like. They can be beautiful. And the garden bed and the walking irrigation through my site was super helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Great, folks. Well, it sounds like it was a good time for all involved. Looking forward to seeing your final designs. Looking forward to having our final Zoom. You know, as usual, questions about anything. But if you're curious, how do we take the next step into design? How does that work? What's the process? Also, if you guys haven't seen via OSU, we've got a webinar with myself and Monica Ibeck on Thursday talking about how we got into our permaculture profession. So that's coming up. And then there's a really great webinar coming up on February 29th on low-tech erosion controls, which goes into the rolling dips and the Zuni bowls and all that by Neil Bertrando and Jeffrey Adams. And I will make sure that I put that both into the chat, and also I'll be sending out an email later today via OSU. So that'll be there as well. Minthia, I also really appreciate being able to replay all the office hours. Here. And big thanks to Nancy Joe for taking the time to go through all the questions and then give them timestamps. A while back, my mom asked me, is there anything, do you want any help with anything? I was like, no, I'm good. She's like, well, what about your videos? Would you like, I could timestamp them? I was like, if you want to. I would never do that. So if you ever want to do a shout out to Nancy Joe on one of the YouTubes, that'd be great. I know she'd appreciate it. All right, folks, great pleasure. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care and have a lot of fun with the final few weeks of the course.
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye.